final sessions that we have in the semester so that you are aware of them. Next week on Monday, we have a couple of students, Luis and Elena, I think, are going to have a conversation with me about a book of essays that was published in Mexico in the fall, called La Nación Desdibujada, so there's that. Then the following Monday, May 1st, we have Antonio Saborit, and Antonio Saborit is a historian of the revolution of the Porfiriato. He's the director of the National Museum of Anthropology, and he's going to come and speak to us about his most recent work, which is actually a little earlier, late 18th century discussion between El Sate and Gringoyo and what was Mexico's first census, which was the census of Mexico City in 1795, and was published and then censored by the Inquisition. So you're welcome to that. And we had slated on May 8th a talk by Mercedes González de la Rocha, who's an anthropologist from CSS in Guadalajara. But that still needs to be confirmed because it's coming at the very end of the semester, and we're not certain that it's going to be worth keeping. She's coming as one of our Gorman speakers. So for now, what we have confirmed is next Monday, the discussion of this book, and then following Monday, Sawarit. You're very welcome to join us. And Greg, welcome to this. This is sort of the home of Mexican affairs at Columbia University. So I hope this is the first of many of your visits. And Greg is originally a documentarist and also a journalist. But he's been living in Mexico for, I guess, 20 years or so, teaching. I just learned the last 12 years at the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Morelos, this is the University of Morelos, which in the last maybe 20 years or so has become a serious university. When I knew it in the 70s, it was basically a basketball court, and there wasn't much of a university there. There was a little bit of a but it is now quite a serious university, and also part of a consortium of institutions that have settled in Cuernavaca, many of them associated to NAM, the National University, but several others, so that they're the National Institute for Public Health in Cuernavaca. So that Cuernavaca, in the last maybe 20, 30 years, has become a little bit of both of a site of exile for Mexico City, people leaving there after the earthquake especially, and an interesting place for a number of reasons. So I was both delighted and a little bit surprised to know that Greg is teaching there in the art department. They have actually quite a well-known art department, and he's teaching film and video there. His work is all very, very political, very connected to social movements. He's part of something, what was it called, authentic journalism?
The School of Authentic Journalism.
The School of Authentic Journalism, which if I understand is a little bit of a traveling school of some sort. There's to move around. And he's also explored the use of both internet platforms and comedy in connection to news and documentary reportage in the last period through a character called Yo Te Joro, in which Greg does really some actually quite fascinating interviews with leaders of social movements. And it's that kind of work that he's come to, that kind of topic, which is the relationship between comedy, documentary work, journalism, and social movements that he's going to speak to us about today. So welcome. This is Gus.
Thanks, Claudio, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Carl as well. We met just a few months ago via the Yo Te Joro Twitter account, which is always a little frustrating because I have to keep the character up while I'm using that account, so eventually I have to switch over so I can speak like a regular person. I've dedicated the past 15 years of my life, almost 20, to telling stories about social movements in Mexico, and the last 7 or 10 years exclusively using comedy and short viral storytelling, viral media, to not only report on social movements, but my intention, and sometimes I'm successful at it and sometimes I'm not successful at it, but my intention is to try to help movements be more effective at obtaining their goals, not just telegraphing ideas or kind of fashion activism, but trying to work strategically to use media to help movements to tell stories. I grew up here in the city. I grew up on 23rd and 1st, and I spent a lot of time uptown here, and that's kind of where my interest in movements and storytelling was kindled. My first political action was over here in the Quad during the anti-apartheid protests. I went to an after-school law program for kids, and the teacher just took us over there every day, and so we spent days on at the barricades during the divestment movement in the 80s. And in the 90s, Mexico, I'm not the first. There are many people who've been obviously captivated by the potential and the aesthetics and the hope that Mexican social movements have to offer. There's obviously a long, long history of that, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But in the 90s, I came to Mexico right at a moment where people were optimistic about the future, where people had a sense of being able to take the reins of history into their hands. So all sorts of things were going on, from the Zapatista rebellion in Chiapas and all the other localized indigenous movements and community movements that inspired. Seeing their victory gave lots of other people hope that they could actually make real and concrete changes in their communities. The PRI was about to fall, or so we thought, in 2000. So the late 90s were an extremely exciting time to be there. And I'm going to talk more about why I switched from making documentaries about those movements to making comedy journalism primarily, but I wanted to start off, just so that you have an idea of the kind of work that I do, by showing a recent film that's not using the Hodo character, but is using another fake journalist character named Tomás Tren, who's it's a film. I'm going to show two excerpts, actually, the beginning and the end of a film called Peligro Cruce de Periodistas, Danger Journalist Crossing, which was made in collaboration with an amazing group of Central American former migrants who are now community organizing, doing political and community organizing with migrants on the way through Mexico. So this is a story that we created together, and I'll tell you more about the genesis of it. We got to play it? Oh yeah, okay. While we're plugging in, I'll just tell a quick synopsis. It's a short film that mixes documentary film with sketch comedy, and it came out of the school that Claudia mentioned, the School of Authentic Journalism, which is a laboratory on how to cover social movements more effectively. And we got together with a group of Central American migrants and asked, what is the biggest problem that you face? And we expected lots of different answers, but one of the first and most persistent answers was, well, horrible media coverage. We're sick of, it was right during the unaccompanied minor fad in the media, where unaccompanied minors from Central America, where the media finally discovered them, so there was story after story about unaccompanied minors. And when we asked people what their biggest concern was, which is that we're tired of being painted either as criminals or as victims. We want to be known for something else. So we heard story after story about horrible journalists coming and interviewing them on the road, and instead of offering any kind of support or storytelling that might actually help their existential cause, using them as raw material for sensational media about either victims or criminals. So this is a film that we made in collaboration with them. I'm just going to show the beginning and the end to get a sense of the kind of what it means to make this kind of journalism / sketch comedy in collaboration with movements.
Soy Armando, vengo de Honduras. He venido a México con la intención de cruzar a Estados Unidos, pero he pasado malos momentos en el camino, abusos de migración, abusos de la Policía Federal, abusos del crimen organizado, en fin, ya sabía que todo esto podía suceder, pero lo que me sorprendió es lo tonto y absurdo que son los periodistas.
Por Dios, no, no, no. Si son migrantes, demuéstrenlo. El mundo necesita ver su sufrimiento. Eso es televisión mundial. Actúenlo.
Y luego los que se creen grandes artistas.
¡Ey, vos, no jodas! ¿Qué estás haciendo?
Es una criatura hermosa, una mariposa monarca que sigue su camino al norte. Quédate así como estás. Voy a inmortalizar este momento.
A veces la gente que se cree nuestros amigos son los más latosos.
¿Qué onda, compañeros? ¿No dan cigarros para la banda? Yo escribir un blog alternativo y pues no pagar dinero y a veces, tú sabes, buena onda.
Esto es un menor no acompañado que ha caminado como miles desde su país, Honduras. Un ejército hambriento yendo hacia las puertas de los Estados Unidos. Puede ser que un día se convierta en pandillero si no lo ya. Desde Ixtepec, México, tu corresponsal, Tomás Trin. Como pueden ver, hay peligro para los niños en todas partes.
Buena onda, Carlos, buena onda. Pues sí, hasta la victoria siempre, sí.
Pero tuvimos que hacer algo. Esta es la historia de lo que hicimos. Mientras tanto, aprovechamos las ganas de ayudar a los periodistas perdidos que no se pudieron presentar al albergue personalmente.
Pásele, ayúdanos para el primer teletón para periodistas, pásele, ayúdanos para el primer teletón para periodistas.
¿Eso qué se debe, carnal?
Para reeducarlos, y debe de cubrir mejor nuestra historia de nosotros los migrantes y no pintarnos como delincuentes.
Ándale. Pues yo lo único que te puedo ayudar es con papel para que se limpien la porquería de lo que dicen.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano.
Entregamos las ganancias a los que más necesitan ayuda, las pobres almas quienes tienen la mala fortuna de trabajar para Televisa, la televisora más grande de América Latina.
Buenas tardes, señor oficial. Disculpe, le vengo a dejar esta despensa para los periodistas. Sí, para los periodistas, para todos los periodistas de Televisa, evitar que sigan vendiendo su alma al diablo y que tengan cómo darle de comer a sus hijos y evitar que sigan hablando tantas barbaridades de los migrantes centroamericanos. Provecho.
Y con tanta organización que se requería para hacerlo, nos dimos cuenta que éramos poderosos.
Nosotros nos hemos organizado como jóvenes migrantes. Así también ustedes se pueden organizar para pelear por sus derechos y no quedarse callados.
Tantas mujeres que están siendo violadas, que están siendo secuestradas, tanto que están haciendo con nuestro pueblo centroamericano, estamos cansados y entonces decimos, basta de esto. Entonces por eso luchamos día a día para que nuestra voz sea escuchada. Tenemos que alzar la voz. Gracias.
Empezamos a actuar. Quitamos a un fiscal encargado de asuntos migratorios que no estaba velando por los derechos de los migrantes. Hicimos cadenas humanas alrededor de muchos migrantes y los acompañamos hacia el norte. Salimos de las sombras, nos presentamos físicamente ante las instituciones mexicanas y ante nuestras embajadas, exigiéndolos a proteger a los migrantes de los abusos de las autoridades y de los criminales.
La migración hoy en día pues nos pone tantos obstáculos, nos echaron los perros. Nosotros no somos animales de caza, nosotros somos personas, somos seres humanos.
Y ahora ese tipo se cree el rey de Twitter. Por lo menos ya dejó su televisora y ahora se la pasa tuiteando sobre nosotros. Todo el mundo sabe que la vida es triste, pero la historia de una lucha creativa, organizada y efectiva es más poderosa que mil historias de tragedia y de tristezas. quedar aquí en México porque nuestro trabajo apenas comienza. Y si pudimos cambiar a los periodistas y si convencemos a más migrantes que con la organización hay poder, no hay nada que no podamos hacer.
So that just gives a sense of the kind of work that we're doing. I think that journalism isn't just about picking the right stories, it's about being strategic. And that means lots of different things. The intention of this film was, number one, to call attention to the fact that telling the right stories about a movement is just as important as telling the stories at all. So picking stories about movements that are organizing to win is an important part of leaving an impact. Journalism doesn't exist in a vacuum. The kinds of stories you pick and what you choose to tell about those stories is important. And we also wanted this to be used as an organizing tool, and that happened. When we premiered this film along the Via Crucis Migrante that happens every year, the migrant Way of the Cross. It's a march through Mexico that happens every year. It's going on right now around the time of Semana Santa. We accompanied a group of migrants from Central America heading north, and at every stop we would show this film. And we'd accompany the film with workshops in nonviolent strategic action. And in the middle of the process of the Via Crucis, under a lot of pressure from the U.S., the migrants were camped out at the very famous migrant shelter that some of you might know of in Ixtepec, Oaxaca, run by the very well-known Padre Solalinde. And the town was surrounded by federal police and immigration police, and they let it know that they weren't going to let the caravan continue north. So after watching this film night after night, for 2 weeks, the idea that you know, more than just getting to the United States to achieve their goals, to get to the United States and get out of Central America, that people, when they got together, could organize and become powerful. And very quickly, Armando and Elvis, the two main characters of this film, organized a workshop and created a strategy to break this blockade of the federal police and immigration police. And in this very dramatic moment, everybody came out of the shelter, marched forward, surrounded by the police. The police obviously wanting the migrants to respond after being provoked, because these are tough people, a lot of them. And they got hit pretty badly, but they didn't fight back, and since they didn't fight back, they had to let them pass through. And I think that this wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been using this film as part of it, as an organizing tactic throughout the entire Via Crucis. And that's one of the uses of these films that I want to have happen. But the reason why I started to make these kinds of film in the first place, and not documentary films as I used to, and I sometimes call myself an ex-documentary filmmaker, is I spent years making documentaries about social movements, first independently and then for Telesur and Al Jazeera eventually. But I felt like I was creating content and not telling stories that might actually have an impact on the real world. And that bothered me, because I think a lot of us, whether we're journalists or academics or cartoonists, I think that's what we want to do ultimately. We want to tell stories, but also we want to try to push the narrative in a direction a little bit. And after a while, I got the sense that I was just feeding a machine that wasn't helping to create any kind of meaningful change. At the same time, everywhere I went, and any of you, well, part of my life over the past 20 years has been acting like an idiot by mistake in communities across Mexico, violating social norms and a kind of comedy of errors that comes when you're from the outside and you're being judged as an outsider, and you make mistakes about the culture that you're going into. And that comedy of errors, I started to realize eventually, was actually, those are really funny stories, and I wanted to take those and exaggerate them and bring them out. So in 2003, there's not enough time to show it now, but in 2003, I decided to put myself on the other side of the a well-meaning gringo that decides to raise money in Mexico City by washing windows and selling gum on the metro for a coup against George Bush during the height of the Iraq War. And so that was kind of the laboratory for doing this elaborate street theater that can be kind of woven together in a narrative about something bigger. Because we actually did this, and that's how we financed the film, because we collected a lot of money selling chewing gum and washing windows. I kept on making films, but little by little, I realized that I wanted to, instead of just making these comedies once in a while as a side project, that I wanted to bring them into the filmmaking work that I was doing, and that when you make comedy in collaboration with people, it brings humanity back to the story. I think that one of the things about human interest stories in general, and political stories, and stories about social movements, is that there's a narrative of resignation or of tragedy that makes people into kind of two-dimensional objects. And the great thing about making comedy in collaboration with communities is that it brings out, it's just like adding the right spice to the soup. It brings out it makes the story more noticeable. And so in 2010, I was already teaching at the UIM and not just practicing journalism, but I decided to take a risk and put aside making serious documentaries completely and only focus on making comedies with movements. And for several years, I made short comedies with the emerging movements against the drug war in Mexico. Any of you who lived in Mexico during the Calderon administration knows what a horrible turn of events happened in 2007, when this kind of the hope that we had for history taking a change in a very different direction that we felt in the 90s was definitely laid to rest for quite a while after Calderon took power. And instead of stories about social movements that were on the verge of changing Mexico, the news became an endless barrage of stories about body counts and a chaotic drug war that was hard to figure out. One of the things that made me realize that comedy was the way to go with covering movements was a turning point was in 2009, when, if any of you were there, I don't know if you remember the swine flu epidemic. And on top of the drug war that was already happening and the fear that everybody already had, for about a week during 2009, the federal government told everybody either not to go outside or to wear surgical masks. So it really felt like this dystopian nightmare world where everybody was walking around with surgical masks, trying not to get shot. And taking my son to school in Cuernavaca, we had to go through 2 military checkpoints. So when my son asked why, I mean, it sort of felt a little bit like the Roberto Benigni character in Life is Beautiful. I had to make some kind of joke about it and make some kind of humor about it. So I made a short film about the swine, a short comedy about the swine flu epidemic, and that was the turning point for me because I felt like it undercut the fear. And when you lower fear, you increase participation in community organizing and in democratic processes. So I decided, okay, this is the formula. I'm going to make comedies about social movements. So I'll show you just a 1-minute clip that we made in collaboration in 2011 with a group of family members of victims of the drug war called Narco And it's a kind of a dummy's guide to the drug war and what's behind the drug war, but told only using a language of jokes, memes, and images related to the Beatles, right? And so I'm going to show the first minute of that film that we made in 2011 called Narco again in collaboration with the new movement against the drug war. Okay, is there a So one of the things that happened when we were making these films, we made about half a dozen of these films. It was a time when people started to take a very serious situation very seriously. For obvious reasons. A lot of people were dying, a lot of people continue to die. It's not a natural environment for comedy. And we got a lot of flack from activists for taking this serious situation lightly. But one of the things that we insisted was that in order for a real national movement to happen, people had to get rid of the fear that was keeping people out of the streets in the first place. And that's one of the things that was one of the tremendous differences between the 90s and the mid-2000s was the fear that people had to engage in any kind of organized dissent. And I think that this, in collaboration with a lot of similar efforts, if you look at the work that El Chamuco, the comics magazine, did in the mid-2000s, finally got people to see what exactly the root causes of the drug war were, and willing to come out and talk about it in public. So in 2011, the culmination of this process, this cultural process of people making media and telling stories that tried to look at the root causes of the drug war, we did have a national movement against the drug war in 2011. In fact, it was kind of funny because lamenting the decline in social movements that had kind of brought me to Mexico in the first place, in 2011 I went to Egypt to cover the uprising in Tahrir Square, and on the plane back, I remember with all these short videos that we had made and this amazing footage, I said to my collaborator, I said, nothing ever happens in Cuernavaca anymore, and there's no social movements are happening. We had to travel halfway around the world to find some hope. And literally the next week, the movement for peace and justice with dignity, el Movimiento por la Paz, por Justicia y Dignidad, set up camp right across the street from my house in the Zocalo of Mexico City. So the fates was kind of answering me there. One of the problems, though, with that movement and a lot of other movements is that people confuse media coverage for the strategy of journalism. That's, I think, one of the biggest problems that we see. That movement in particular organized a lot of events with the express purpose of getting media coverage. And once that happens, movements tend to start behaving in a way which is only designed to get a better photo op. And you start organizing, so to speak, in managed sound bites instead of actually doing real community and political work that's focused and strategic. And to address that fact, a friend of mine and I formed a school called the School of Authentic Journalism that Claudio mentioned. And it's a laboratory that has a campus in Morelos where we do a session every year, but we also travel around the world and do sessions in different places. And the objective of our school is to bring people who have been a part of successful social movements and also bring media makers and journalists. And it's a laboratory where we teach the basics of making good journalism, but we also want to teach social movement strategy to journalists so they can understand how their journalism can form a part of a grand strategy of a movement, or at least what the consequences of their journalism will be. One of the biggest films that came out of that project was a film called Frack You Mexico, and that's one of the films that I also feel most proud of, and it's the film that created the character that is kind of my alter ego now, Hodo. At the end of 2013, as many of you know, Mexico was debating changes to the energy law to allow the private sector, both national and international, to participate in the energy market. And the debate was very poor. That's one of the things that's happened in this context of the drug war, that so much news and media about death and carnage drowns out an intelligent debate that used to happen more often in Mexico, I think. So on the one side, you have this classic technocratic narrative. We have to make Pemex, the national oil company, more efficient. We're losing money. We need to save education, and the only way by doing that is to invite foreign investment. And on the other side, you had a narrative which was spearheaded by López Obrador and his new political party, Morena, which was about a very kind of hollow nationalism that hands off oil, the oil is ours, which of course is a legitimate concern, but when we studied the situation more, we realized that the real story that people weren't talking about was that the main reason that they wanted to open up foreign investment into the oil industry was in order to get to oil that was deep underwater in the Gulf and to frack, which had only been happening on a very limited scale. Fracking, as you know, is hydraulic fracturing. Everybody knows this by now. A cocktail of 250 chemicals pumped into the Earth's crust, liberates gas and gets to gas and oil that would otherwise not be available, but it also leaves lots of toxic chemicals in the ground. And I read an article from the ex-ambassador, Tony Garza, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, talking about, in very clear terms, okay, this energy reform law is all about fracking. And luckily, nobody's talking about it, he said in the letter, because people get scared about fracking. From his perspective, people get spooked by fracking. But the fact was, this major change to Mexico's energy law was about to happen, and nobody knew what fracking was. So we wanted to tell that story. But as I said before, the reason for doing this kind of comedy journalism is that we want to make sure that our films have an impact in the real world. So we wanted to make a film that would go viral, tell the story of what fracking was, and ideally be used as, again, as an organizing tool. So we collaborated with this organization called the Alianza Mexicana contra el Fracking, the Mexican Alliance Against Fracking. And on the eve of the vote of the energy law, we created this short film, Fracking Mexico. And I'm going to show about a 3-4 minute clip from the very middle of the film. The clip I'm going to show you opens up with this character, Hodo, who is supposedly a Texas oil man, who's the most ridiculous caricature of a Texas oil man, with a portable module going through the streets of Mexico City using Mexican food, adding chemicals to it to show what fracking is. So it's just a short little clip. It's going to show that and 2 other scenes. Let me just show you that right now. Can someone turn off the lights? Pero no se preocupen, porque también nosotros lo dejamos nosotros. Solamente el gas, sino todos los químicos que metemos para romper la piedra. Provecho, jóvenes.
Quédese con su coco envenenado. Yo no lo permito, yo no lo permito porque yo amo a México.
Yo también amo a México. Yo creo que amo este país más que usted.
Sí.
Tanto es mi amor por México que yo venir a fraquear con todos.
Claro, a fregar a todos.
A fraquear.
Joder.
No joder, fraquear.
Es lo mismo.
No. Joder empieza con H y fraquear con F.
No, es oder.
Entonces nos deslindamos de cualquier accidente que podría pasar. Tengo que reprobar los primeros alumnos de Frack U, pero no importa, porque en la Cámara de Diputados yo tengo muchos amigos que van a cambiar la Constitución para que nosotros podamos hacer negocios en México. Y ellos ya saben bien qué es el fracking y qué es el gas de lutitas.
La pizarra, es una pizarra. El deterioro del medio ambiente es horizontal. No es como cuando usted perfora un pozo en donde solamente lastima una parte. Esto no, porque entran las máquinas y destruyen una gran parte del ecosistema, sobre todo en los mantos freáticos. Si se da la reforma energética, entonces vendrán los particulares a hacer las perforaciones. El costo de la modernidad se paga. no hay una sola modernización que no se haya pagado un costo, ya sea del medio ambiente, ya sea en derechos humanos. Todos, absolutamente todos pagamos un costo, pero no hay otra.
Con mis tratos ya hechos con el gobierno mexicano, ahora nos toca reeducar a los más chiquitos en Frankfurt Kinder. Muy buenos días, niñas y niños. ¿Quién de ustedes saben qué es la fractura hidráulica, también conocido como el fracking? ¿Saben? ¡No! ¿No saben qué es el fracking? ¡Qué crimen! Había una vez un país que se llamaba México, y debajo de la tierra hay mucho gas y petróleo muy rico y muy dulce. A mí me gustan las cosas ricas y dulces. ¿Ustedes? Sí. Pero había un hombre muy malo. Se llamaba Lázaro Cárdenas. Él no quería que nosotros ayudáramos a ustedes a sacar ese gas de la tierra. Entonces, lo que yo necesito es que todos ustedes me ayuden a deshacernos de este mal hombre para que nosotros podamos sacar ese gas utilizando nuestro amigo la fractura hidráulica. ¿Quién me quiere ayudar? ¡No! No lo escucho. ¿Quién me quiere ayudar? ¡No! Bueno, entonces fórmense porque nosotros nos vamos a rompernos un Lázaro Cárdenas. They'll get used to it. Their parents did. Okay, so lights, please. A couple things about this short. One of the things that I think is most important about making these films is pinpointing an image that can tell in a condensed form a broader story, a metaphor, some kind of visual metaphor that will tell the story. So the story of this film is comprised of about 3 or 4 of those metaphors, and this one I think is the clearest one, where we're offering a narrative in which the promise of fracking is a hollow one, because you trade away control over local resources, and what you get in exchange, using a very poor narrative to excuse it, and you get in exchange polluted water, polluted land, and it's a raw deal. So we wanted to use these visual metaphors and made that very clear. One of the other things that I think happened after we made this film was, well, for one, it went by. I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but around 2014 when it came out, it left our hands. It really became a virus. It went out of our control. People were uploading it as theirs. I had to take down a few copies where literally there were Google ads for fracking fluids over the video. It was all over the place, and I got hit by an old lady who recognized me in Mexico City. Said, "You're that Texan guy." Not really, but yes, I did. Sorry. But it taught a lot of people what fracking was. But the problem is one of the reasons I decided to stop making documentary films for television was, again, I felt like I was making content that was disposable. In the beginnings of the 2010s, I think a lot of us had this utopian narrative about the way social media could help political organizing. Even though we were critical of it, there were these myths around the Arab Spring and other movements around the world in which people thought that if you could tell a story on social media and get that story to a critical mass of people, there would inevitably be some kind of change. There would be no stopping it. The problem, as we know, is that we produce collectively so much media for disposable consumption online that much of this media do online journalism face. And so I want to go back to this idea that I was talking about with the film Danger Journalist Crossing. It's important, if you're going to make this kind of film, not just to try to make it go viral, but to use an infrastructure in the real world to organize around that film. And one interesting thing happened with this film, Frack You Mexico. Okay, so it went viral. I was kind of going crazy about the fact that we were losing control of that narrative, that I wasn't quite sure what the next step was. And then I got an email, and it had turned out that in Quetzalan, some of you probably been to Quetzalan in the Sierra Norte de Puebla. Quetzalan is in that part of Puebla which is up around, close to the northern edge of Veracruz and close to the Huasteca, and it's where the shale that extends down from Texas. It's the southernmost tip of that shale gas deposit. And somebody at a town meeting, the Ejidatarios, somebody downloaded the film and showed the film, and there were about 50 people there, and somebody knew that there was shale gas underneath the municipality, the municipio. And people got concerned, and there was a lawyer present at the meeting from the town that works in Puebla, and that lawyer figured out how to get an amparo to prevent fracking in that town. So it became the first frack-free zone in Mexico. And there's now a movement that's going on mostly in northern Mexico to establish frack-free zones. Most of Mexico is in northern Mexico. Most of Mexico's shale gas regions are gradually being fracked. Most people don't even know, and most people don't know what's going on in their communities because, not to get too sidetracked, but I think a lot of you know that the subsuelo, everything that's underneath the ground in Mexico, is federal property, unlike here where you have to go picking off land rights and buying off subsoil rights from individual property owners. There you don't have to do that. You can just, since it happens horizontally, you can just frack zone into somebody's farm and you don't even have to tell them. So a lot of it's happening silently, but little by little, there is a frack-free town movement that's happening in northern Mexico. And the important thing that I want to mention then is that one thing is to have a video go viral, and it's one thing if 1 million people see a video, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't have the right 50 people using that film for meaningful use. So journalism in and of itself can never change the world, but journalism in collaboration with organized movements and communities can play a part in that change. And this film, I think, has demonstrated it. But the other thing is that I've done about a dozen of these characters over the years, and Jote Hodo was the one that got most recognized when I was walking on the street. It was the funniest, and so we decided we wanted more of this character. So our current project is an internet television show called El Jote Hodo Show, and the idea is Joe goes around. Joe has decided that he loves Mexico so much he's figured out that it's Mexico and not Mexico, so he's proud of himself, and he wants to become the first Presidente Gringo de Mexico. He wants to be the first Gringo president of Mexico. Kind of in the same way that, you know, before when Gandhi came back from South Africa, he went around India to reacquaint himself with his country and learn about what was going on in India before he launched his national movement. Jote Hodo has decided that he wants to do a tour around Mexico and meet people, especially people who are stubborn and who have this antiquated idea of national sovereignty and community organization and democracy, and talk to them so that he can make the world safe for his political party. And his political party is called Güero, white guy, and it stands for Gringos Unidos con Españoletes para restablecer el orden. Right? So Gringos united with wannabe Spaniards to reestablish order. So that's the premise of this show. But the idea is that Joe is just a foil so that the movements and the people that he interviewed can shine. And we try to talk to people who are in movements about which there's either some kind of misconception, or who are not your typical activists, organizers. So, for example, I'm going to show about 2 or 3 clips here, 3 clips from 2 different episodes, and I'll just show them back to back so that there's less interruption. And I want to make sure we have time for questions because we end at 6, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to show a couple of these clips. the first episode is an interview with the representative of the CRAC, the community police from Guerrero. That's a whole other complicated concept, but in Mexico there's oftentimes a lot of confusion between autodefensas, the self-defense groups, and community police, which is a whole different thing. And one of the things, since I'm interested in nonviolent social movement organizing, I think that the main difference is that the community police, their power comes from organization, and the autodefensa's power comes from big guns, right? And that's in a word, that's the main difference. So in order to kind of get rid of that confusion, I wanted to interview somebody from the community police, and in the second episode that I'll show you, or at least clips of from the episode, we interview Miss Guerrero, Samantha Leva, who is a supermodel from Acapulco who has become a community organizer. And she's exactly the kind of person I want to highlight in the show, because ordinary people, or people who are not your typical activists who are doing community organizing and are doing political work, are to me more interesting than kind of lifestyle activists. So I'll just show these clips and we can talk more about that. México, un grupo de indígenas de esta comunidad, San Luis Acatlán, tienen su propio grupo de policías comunitarios. Y eso es una muy mala noticia para un hombre de negocios como yo. Por suerte, jamás he visto un grupo de policías en este país que no tienen su precio. Vamos a ver si ellos tienen el suyo. Estamos aquí con el señor Ignacio Navarro
Mozo.
Mozo. Estamos aquí con el señor Ignacio. Ustedes tienen su propia policía, ¿verdad?
Esto es una coordinadora regional de autoridades comunitarias, policía comunitaria, con mucho orgullo.
Policías comunitarias. O sea, ¿ustedes no necesitan el gobierno para hacer sus policías?
Lo tuvimos que hacer. Mucha impunidad por parte de nuestro gobierno, que tiene una ideología igual que tú, gringo, cabrón.
Por eso este país,
que esas instituciones de gobierno las vamos a sacudir con las dos manos.
Yo también los estoy sacudiendo para sacudir.
Pero para tu provecho.
Ah, exactamente. Ya estamos hablando de mi propio lingo. ¿No? Bueno.
La crack no tiene precio. Los pueblos no tienen precio, el territorio no tiene precio.
Yo quiero proponerle un trato. Si yo logro comprar un grupo de policías de la CRAC, ustedes me dejan entrar con mis amigos en una compañía minera y sacar el oro de los cerros. ¿De acuerdo?
Va a ser un reto. Si no lo logras, te voy a sacar de aquí, gringo cabrón.
Ah, bueno, pero mientras, wow, compadre. I'm comido. Porque el único que pone yo te jodo en el ridículo soy yo. Yo me llamo Joe J. Hodo. Mucho gusto. Cierra con la Mi asistente Miss Houston está embarazada y debido a las malditas leyes de este país le tengo que dar 3 meses de incapacidad. Eso se va a cambiar cuando yo sea presidente. Pero no se preocupen. Aquí en este estado de Guerrero, los lugareños me han dicho que cerca de aquí anda la hermosa modelo Samantha Leva, Miss Guerrero 2016. Yo creo que puede ser muy útil para la campaña de mi partido político. Güero, ¿me acompañan a buscarla? ¡Vámonos! Samantha Leiva casi ganó el concurso Miss México 2016 y escuché que le interesaba la política. Perfecto para mí. Me senté con ella para investigar. Alguien me dijo que cuando tú fuiste a todo el concurso de Miss México, que hablaste de un tema social y político.
Sí, así es. Toqué un tema muy importante para aquí, para Guerrero. Toqué un tema sobre la comunidad afro.
Espera. Afros en México, eso no es una cosa. Yo sé.
Precisamente por eso hablé, porque se los tenía invisibilizados, porque la gente no sabía de su existencia. Tú no sabes de su existencia.
Yo no estoy convencido, que jamás he conocido un afro-mexicano en la vida. No estoy seguro si eso existe.
Yo soy afro. De verdad, yo soy afro.
Fui de incógnito a las calles de la Costa Chica para investigar si de verdad había afros en México. Y como dijo Samantha, sí había. A veces uno se siente...
A veces sí.
¿No se siente enojada con la gente por haber discriminado en contra de la gente afro?
No. ¿Por qué?
Bueno, es que yo quiero que usted esté enojada para que juntos hagamos un trato y tomamos venganza en contra de todos los demás mexicanos, quitamos sus bienes, le hago socio y...
No es bueno la venganza.
No llegamos a ningún lado.
No es buena la venganza.
No llegamos a ningún lado, sí. Tal vez Samantha me podría dar una pista de cómo manipular, o mejor decir, aprovechar de la gente afro en México para convertirme en presidente. ¿Qué es lo que quieres entonces para la comunidad, digamos, afro-mexicana?
Principalmente que tengan mejores accesos de salud y de educación, que puedan tener una vivienda digna también, y sobre todo que se les reconozca constitucionalmente para que ellos tengan acceso a estas políticas de salud, estas políticas de educación.
Reconocimiento constitucional suena un poco socialista para mí, y eso ni siquiera fue el más alarmante. Viajo 3,000 kilómetros para alejarme de ese tipo de hashtag. Y aquí también podremos hacer un trato. Me regalas unos 100 kilómetros de playa en la Costa Chica. Y a cambio, yo llamo a mis amigos en el Congreso Mexicano y veo qué puedo hacer para ganar el reconocimiento constitucional. ¿Está bien?
No, las playas de México no se venden. Las playas de México se disfrutan y son para todos.
Estuve en jaque otra vez. Y no fue justo. Nadie me dijo que una reina de belleza podría tener una mente formidable. Tenía que haber algo que podría pedir prestado de esta comunidad. Eso era. Ponte a un lado, Taco Bell. ¿Qué pensaría usted si yo abriera un restaurante de comida afro-mexicana, en donde yo soy el dueño? ¿Sería buena idea?
Sí.
Y abrimos ese restaurante. Yo voy a tener los derechos de cocinar, pero usted ya no podría cocinar las recetas en su casa. ¿No hay inconveniente? Porque yo voy a ser el dueño de las recetas, de la comida afro de esta zona. ¿Está bien?
Pues yo creo que no.
Dios mío, ¿qué es lo que tengo que hacer para que la gente me deje hacer lo que quiero hacer?
Porque a usted todo le va a llegar a usted.
Eso es la idea. So at the end of every episode, I'll give you the information to watch all the episodes. But at the end of every episode, the community basically kicks Joe's ass in some way, and that's important because it's kind of it's a part of the narrative is creating visual metaphors about people winning against, again, a metaphor for things that ail them. So it's kind of like if anybody has been to, a lot of you obviously know it, but you know, in Mexico at the end of Semana Santa, you burn this effigy of the devil, and Joe Tejodo is kind of like that devil, that cartoon devil. But it's a kind of an act of political theater that induces people towards winning. Because a lot of the things that happen with social movement media is is people are addicted to kind of a narrative of tragedy or despair or of inevitability. So this is also about using comedy to expand the realm of the possible and to show people organizing and having fun doing it and winning, and Joe always loses. That's important for the story. The other thing is that it's important for us to see this show as part of a broader project and with a lot of moving parts. So we want to use the comedy and certain less obvious protagonists in the films, like Ms. Guerrero, to attract people who wouldn't ordinarily watch movies about or watch short films online about social movements. So it's about doing that. But here's the interesting thing: is that for example, after the Ms. Guerrero episode came out, we kept track of all the people who liked the Joe Tejodo page or who subscribed to some of our different channels, and most of them were from the Costa Chica. And then they all watched the next episode. So the idea here is that we're trying to be strategic about cross-pollinating one story that's interesting to one community to an audience that got to know this project because of another targeted film that came out the month before. So that's important. And again, since I'm interested in using viral media, not just to go viral as an end in of itself, we're not YouTubers who want tons of visitors. We want things to go viral so that they can have resonance in the real world. So part of the reason we decided to run this character for president is there are two reasons. One, there's the more obvious narrative that Joe, when we do live campaign events, Joe tells people that you either have two options. You can sit back and let Joe run the country, or you can organize and run your own country and get to know your neighbors again and rebuild some of the social fabric that's been busted to pieces over the past 15 years and take democracy back into your own hands and change history, or you can just let Joe take care of everything. So we decided to create this character as a kind of as this engineered reverse psychology mobile tour. So we have this little van that we use now to do sort of campaign events and show these films live. And at those events, we have local organizers try to organize people who come to see it, and we offer also flyers for a series of strategic nonviolence training workshops that some of the people that we work with do. So that's the reason why we're doing that. So the last thing I wanted to show is just a 1.5-minute clip from Bloomberg News. Because one of the things that we do, again, I talked before about how movements and people who make their own media sometimes make the mistake of going after any media coverage possible, which then leads your movement to only design itself to attract more media attention, and that's a mistake. So what we try to do is we try to be, again, very intentional about bleeding into other media. Joe only gives interviews in character. We have to know somebody who's part of the organization in some way, where we can have some kind of guaranteed control of the narrative, and it has to be useful to the project or a movement that we're working with in some way. So we announced the campaign for Joe Tejodo on Bloomberg News, and I'll just show that little clip. And the reason we did this, again, is to draw attention to the project, and drawing attention to the project is about drawing attention to the movement. So, can you turn off the lights, please?
Ahí veíamos a un candidato que se quedó con las ganas de contender por la Casa Blanca, pero que sabe bastante de lo que nos puede esperar con Donald Trump. Es Joe Tejodo, un tejano al que le agradezco estar con nosotros. Joe, Trump presidente, tú decías que quizás no está siendo lo suficientemente duro con México, que habría que ser más creativos.
Es muy a medias ese candidato. Todo lo que puede ser Trump, yo puedo hacer más. A él le falta visión. Yo voy a hacer un túnel, el túnel más largo del mundo para privatizar la migración. Él quiere parar la migración. A mí se me hace que es una falta de visión.
Joe, tú nos traes propuestas de campaña el día de hoy, porque todavía me imagino que tú tienes tu intención de contender por la Casa Blanca en las próximas, en las de 2020.
Yo estoy pensando tan en grande de que yo no tengo ganas de esperar hasta el 2 de México, y aunque ya se haya acabado el tiempo para competir para la Casa Blanca, en Los Pinos está abriendo una nueva una recompetencia para ver quién se va a quedar con los pinos y para qué yo no podría ser el primer presidente gringo de México.
¿Con qué partido lo vas a hacer?
Yo estoy abriendo un nuevo partido, se llama Güero, Gringos Unidos con Españoletes para restablecer el orden. Y nuestro lema es, ¿para qué necesitamos una Malinche cuando puedes tener un Cortés? Yo quiero ser el nuevo Cortés y con mucho gusto voy a cumplir ese papel.
Listo, con esto nos quedamos. Yo te jodo, repíteme el nombre del partido, es Gringos Unidos con Españoletes para restablecer el orden. Ese partido va a estar estrenándose en la contienda presidencial del 2018 aquí en México.
¿Por qué no?
Perfecto, yo te jodo, gracias por estar con nosotros. Nos vemos más seguido acá.
Gracias a ti, Victor Hugo. Un placer.
Yeah, so I think I've talked for quite a while now, so that I think this is a good time. If anybody has any questions about the project or doing this kind of journalism in general, I'd love to hear your comments.
Thank you. The floor is open. We have about 20-25 minutes, and then afterward there's a reception here where we can continue the discussion. So the floor is open for questions. En español o en inglés.
Going back a little bit to the narco work and all that, I'm glad you brought up that sometimes talking about the issue can be perceived by the population as something negative. And I would like to know your opinion on all this narco culture that's been developed, especially like soap operas, TV shows, where I personally believe that narco culture is glamorized. And, you know, they're seen as this successful people, you know, using lead actors, you know, and it's something you detected and you gave a good response based on your work, but I would like to know your thoughts on this other, that I think it's actually the opposite, they're just glamorizing it.
Yeah, and again, that's a huge topic, but this is one of the things that I think is, I think that as a journalist, I think I reserve my harshest criticism for other journalists, as you can kind of see from the beginning, the first film that I showed, which also gets me some negative feedback sometimes. But I think that in general, when reporting on the drug war, people have been talking about the wrong thing. So that, for example, one of the things that people forget a lot of the time is that obviously the brutality and violence associated with drug trafficking is horrible, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that it's one of the only forms of upward social mobility that people have in a society which still has a very poor distribution of wealth, and in which upward advancement in business, in government, even in academia, everywhere is all about friends and all about who you know. So that narcocultura is one of the only true meritocracies in Mexico. I mean, it's true. Nobody wants to talk about that, but it's true. People talk about the wrong things, I think, and I think that it's important to choose what you talk about. Obviously, I think it's terrible to glamorize this stuff, but that's why you need to tell other entertaining narratives that also show the root causes. I mean, I know beat reporters who have been killed for covering the drug war, but I think that chasing ambulances is not going to get us to the answer that we're looking for either. I think people need to tell better stories and ask better questions. So yes, I agree with you, but again, journalism, media making, storytelling, when it's strategic, is all just as much about what you don't cover as it is about what you cover.
I have a question related to the differences in when you approach to humor, but also to political correctness, both in Mexico and the United States. Like, do you think that there's a connection between the political correctness in the United States with the topics that you don't talk about in Mexico, and they're like sacred and protected? And do you think that in the context of course, the Trump era is connected to the criticisms that the liberal media has today. Like, you are part of the counter-hegemonic media that is happening around the world, but also here in the United States. Is there something there, like, could explain, like, in this new wave of journalism?
Yeah, I think that I agree that I think that being too precious about certain topics has alienated our ability to discuss those topics, for one. So, for example, the fact that there are lots of taboo subjects, and in activist circles, there's a very set way that you should talk about things. I'm one of the people who thinks that that's harmful for discourse, and it's harmful for organizing. And I think that it's important I think that it's important to use a language when you're talking about social issues that opens the stories up to as many different people as possible, and people who are outside the usual activist bubble. And I think that political correctness reinforces that activist bubble. On the other hand, political correctness exists in the first place because people used to say a lot of horrible racist stuff, and they still do. So, so it's not. I'm also so at the same time that I'm critical of it, I think that you just need to be intelligent about how you talk about things, and so that talk about things differently, but in a way in a way which respects people, but also attracts people who maybe don't like political correctness. I don't know if that answers your question. But
Would you talk about a topic in the United States that you're not talking in Mexico?
Would I talk about a topic in the United States that I'm not talking about in Mexico?
Yes, like,
for example,
like the African Americans, for instance.
Yeah. That's a whole other thing. I think that there is a kind. Okay, so in Mexico, for example, that's just people don't talk. Everybody knows that very few people talk about Afro-Mexicanidad, right? And people, and if you look at the comment section, there's still people who think, oh, there's no racism in Mexico. I'm not kidding me. So that maybe is a different way of trying to cover up just conversation about a particular topic, but one which has to be unmasked, but in a different way. So it's not political correctness, but it is a certain, but it's silence and it's neglect. And yes, I believe in going to those places.
You talked a little bit about how social movements waste their time with the media a lot, and I was wondering if you could comment on what you think a better strategy is in terms of talking to journalists. And
I think that the most important thing is for movements to make their own media, and that goes to movements around the world, from the anti-apartheid movement to the Zapatista movement to the civil rights movement here in the United States. Making your own media is super, super important. Why? Because even, number one, in a world in which storytelling and sound bites overwhelms us all the time, one of the cardinal rules of movement should be define or be defined by others. So I think it's important for movements to make their own media, and in lieu of that, movements should work with people who are not objective, who have a vested interest in those movements. I don't believe in objectivity in media. I believe in truthfulness, but I don't believe in objectivity. There's a difference. So this is these are the facts, but this is my perspective. And I think that so collaborating with journalists who understand what a movement needs and can tell a story that defines a movement in terms that are beneficial to that movement creates a standard by which others then have to respond. And that was one of the main things that we're always trying to do. It's what we were trying to do with fracking, was to be the first ones to define fracking, so that movements could operate in an environment in which people had to respond to an idea that we already put forth to the world about what fracking is and why it's harmful and what can be done about it. So that's the main thing. Number one, make your own media. If you can't, work with people who you trust, and be cautious about talking to the media if you don't have any kind of control. And I teach this both in my classes at the UIM and also at the School of Authentic Journalism, but it's a mistake that sometimes I make. I gave an interview to the BBC about the migrant film a few years ago, and it was a disaster. And it reminded me of my own lesson, which is try to make sure that you have some degree of control in the piece that's being told about you, because otherwise you have to fight an uphill battle. Right? The other thing, and this is one thing that I didn't mention in the presentation, but obviously comedy journalism is not a new thing. Everybody does it. It's everywhere. Even in Mexico now. I don't know if any of you watched Chumel's show, if you know who he is. Chumel is like the Jon Stewart of Mexico, and he's been running his own YouTube show for years, and now has a deal with HBO. They even show his show here. But I think that one of the traps that comedy journalism falls into is that when you're just parroting and you're not talking about what you're for, you reinforce what you're trying to fight against. And so that's the other rule that I think is that you should remember in response to your question. Right now, the late night landscape in this country, for example, is all about making fun of Trump, which is exactly what CNN and MSNBC and every other cable news show did in the run-up to the election. They're reinforcing his power because they're making him a topic of conversation every damn night. So one of the things that we're trying to do here is use comedy journalism as a foil to uplift what you want to talk about. That part is not exactly what you asked, but I think it's relevant to what you asked. So, yes.
It seems to me that you want to help movements with these tools, but what about movements that, in some people's opinions, shouldn't happen? For example, in Guadalajara there was a movement, and in other cities of Mexico, around the family and anti-gay marriage and anti-gay adoption, and it was a very big movement, and it's actually unfortunately growing. So what about those cases?
As far as I'm concerned, don't talk to, I'm not going to waste my time trying to uplift them, obviously. The thing about any kind of tool is that anybody can use it, right? So for example, has access to these tools, but as much as I can, I won't report on them. And when we hold our school, we're very discretionary about who can come. We want to teach our tools to people who will use it for what we think is more or less in alignment with. We're non-specifically ideological, but we have obviously an amorphous and very clear sense of what we're for, and don't share what you know with those folks. Although eventually they're going to figure it out. I mean, the other thing is, and the thing is that. You could spend time satirizing those movements, but it's very dangerous because, again, when you satirize something, when you talk about something, you can often inadvertently reinforce that thing. So I think that the best treatment is the silent treatment. Let things die on the vine, and create. One of our upcoming episodes is about the growing queer rights movement in Mexico. And so showing what you're for instead of cutting down others and trying to make it attractive and cool to a broader movement and undercut their support is the best strategy. But don't give them airtime.
When you say we thought of this, we decided that,
yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that is? That's my first question. The second is, what about all this gringo business some of the stuff that you're doing there could feel a little bit like, okay, you're teaching the Mexicans, the gringos, have all these intentions, and because you sort of are one, except you're really not. Yeah. And it could also be read as a kind of pedagogy of what Mexico should be taught by a kind of chastised gringo who's converted to some kind of deep Mexicanity that he doesn't want to see lost.
You're not talking about anybody specific.
Sorry to put it so bluntly, but like, I mean, when you see a piñata of Lázaro Cárdenas being put there like that, it seemed to me like quite a heavy-handed lesson in what Mexico should be and what they shouldn't forget.
Yeah.
So, who's the we, and how do you feel about that point?
Yeah. Well, let me address them separately. So when I say the we, there's this project, the Jote Hodo Show, is a project of the School of Authentic Journalism, and everybody who's involved in the production process, the crew, the producer, sound people, the writers, were all either graduates or professors of the school, and more specifically, that we is a group of now more than 500 plus alumni, mostly from Latin America, but also from everywhere from Tanzania to Singapore.
Interesting. So it's a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people, but not actively working on the crew. On the crew, of the show, there's about 20 people, and just out of practical reasons, everybody on the crew is local. So there's one at the Gringo, but everybody else is local. And I know that it's heavy-handed, and I know that I'm being very opinionated about what I feel. But I think that people have a right to discuss cultures or give their opinions about cultures that might not necessarily be their own, if they can make a convincing argument when it's done. So the work either works or it doesn't work. But I think that it's okay. I don't think it's off limits for people to come from outside and make a comment, even if that comment is strong or unpopular. And I think that goes for every direction imaginable. So that goes for Koreans talking about China. It goes for Chilangos talking about Tapatíos. I think it goes everywhere. One of the things that is also that I kind of intentionally, one of the intentional, I suppose, ironies is I've gradually eased into this work. The more and more I personally feel invested in Mexico as my home, as my family's home, as the place where my son will live, as the place where I will spend the rest of my life. And so, in a weird sort of way, the more, I became naturalized at a certain point, but what a piece of paper says is what least matters, right? I became more and more compelled to tell these stories and to become this kind of exaggerated, obviously hyper-real gringo character. The more and more I felt not just a sense of permission, but actually a civic duty to tell these stories. So becoming this goofy, artificial gringo has been my most sincere form of patriotism to my adopted country, which is, and that's what I feel about it.
Okay. And it's connected to this.
Yeah.
Even if you go beyond the gringo Mexican thing, what are the limits of have you reflected on what are the limits between what you perceive are these movements' interests and goals and what they can feel at a certain point? I mean, you mentioned this sort of a trade-off between the capacity to expand your reach and maintaining a certain purity, so to speak, in the message and so on. At the same time, maybe some of these people, want to be on TV, or they think that maybe going public on TV can better further their. So what are the limits? What's the level of reflection that you have to make to, are you sure that what you perceive as the right thing for them is what they perceive as the right thing to them? That sort of thing.
That's a good question, and ultimately, look, every single individual, every single movement is free to either individually or collectively do whatever they want. what we teach at the school is a set of common conclusions and common beliefs that that those of us who have been veterans either of movements that have been affected to some degree or who have experience covering those movements feel works. And obviously people disagree with it. And people are obviously free to do whatever they want. But this is the guiding philosophy under which we're operating. Other people don't have to follow those same guidelines, but it's what we think is the best strategy. Anybody can do whatever they want, individually, as a journalist, and also movements. When I say the we, I only speak for the people that are involved in this process, who are involved in the school, and movements with which we already have an affinity. It's not about preaching to people about what they should or shouldn't do. Obviously, for example, look, some of Mexico's most successful movements have another guiding principle, have other different guiding principles under which they operate, and they've been very successful. And they don't need anybody to tell them what to do. But it's a set of principles and guidelines which can be effective, and the people with whom I work, we believe that this is effective, an effective strategy.
I think you have time for one more question, and then we can continue at the reception. I think, gentlemen.
Yeah, following up on a couple of things you've already talked about. When Donald Trump first ran for office here, it was widely believed that he had no intention of winning, but who wanted to inject some humor into the campaign, which he did very effectively. But I wonder if one has to be prepared to tell the difference between comedy and political discourse. I mean, you mentioned also the late night parodies of Trump. Many people watch those not knowing whether this is really Trump or whether it's Alec Baldwin, because it's there are just some people who it's very hard to ironize. Can you say that in English? It's very difficult to treat somebody like Donald Trump or Hodo or Felipe Calderon with irony when the irony is already there. So I wonder if you have to prepare to show these films, if you have to prepare people who are already in a state of understanding that this is parody, this is comedy, and this is not the real thing.
It's a good point. Obviously, one of the big differences is that Trump is real, Calderon is real, and Hodo is obviously a hollow piñata. And, I think that it's impossible to educate every single person who watches a work of media online in a world of social media and in a social media ecosystem. But I think that also calls attention to the fact that no one work of journalism exists in a vacuum. It's important for works of journalism, for storytelling in general, to play off one another. When we were doing the work with the drug war parodies, we were publishing it under the website Narco News, which had been covering the drug war for about 15 years. And so we made very clear that these parodies would go to a page where there would be a serious article about the root causes of the drug war. So whenever possible, it's good to try to think again in webs of information, because it's impossible to give a primer to everybody who watches those shows. But it's important to think in a complete media ecosystem, and whenever possible, use parody to bait people into other, perhaps more sobering and straight works of media and storytelling. That's the best way to do it, I think.
Well, please join me in thanking you. Thank you so much. It's really fascinating.
Great.
And thanks very much. And we can continue the discussion.